RLI graduates, RLI alumni, future RLI, RTS, family, Hartman family, Mishpacha. I have a very special honor today to introduce the member of Knesset, Rabbi Dov Lipman, who moved from Silver Spring, Maryland to Beit Shemesh 9 years ago with his wife and 4 children. He has Chaver Knesset Rabbi Lipman has a rabbinic ordination from Ner Yisrael Rabbinic College and a Master of Education from Johns Hopkins University. The author of 3 books about Judaism and an experienced educator, Chaver Knesset Rabbi Lipman rose to national and international prominence for his role in challenging and combating religious extremists in Beit Shemesh. He was elected to the 19th Knesset as a member of the Yesh Atid party led by Chaver Knesset Yair Lapid, and is the first American-born MK in close to 30 years. And you know, after reading his bio, nothing. Because now I'd like to introduce Chaver Knesset Rabbi Lipman. No, now I want to introduce him. This is the stuff. What you know is that Israel is hungry for people who live by a simple teaching of our Torah. That V'ahavta Hashem Elohecha does not reflect simply your internal passion and fire and internal devotion. But V'ahavta Hashem Elohecha sheyeh Shem Shamayim mitahev al yadcha. If you love God, do you spread it? Are you a Mekadesh Shem Shamayim Barabim? In a country which is so often polarized by people who belong to different tribes and who pride themselves not only in the tribe they live in, but in what nasty things they can say about the other. There is one person in Israel, there's a few, but there's one who in the Knesset is setting a completely different standard of what it means to love God, what it means to be mechuyav l'Torah, what it means to lekabel kol adam b'sever panim yafot, and who single-handedly is creating a new atmosphere in this country. I can't tell you how honored I am that in today's graduation, as you rabbis go out and spread that there's a model of somebody who is Ohev Hashem, who causes Shem Shamayim to lihit ahev al yado. It is really a distinct honor and a privilege to invite Chaver Knesset Rabbi Dov Lipman to speak to you.
Thank you so much, Hartman. Big mazel tov to all of the graduates. Just listening to Navat Tila right now, I have to imagine that in the Beit HaMikdash, the music was something of that nature where you can just lose yourself spiritually and feel connected. So I'm sorry that I have to speak now after their performance, and you can't just listen for the next 40 minutes or so. I listen to them instead, but I'll try to be close to as inspirational as their music was. My role here today is to share with you as you go out and begin your years, decades of service to the Jewish people with a message of hope and a message of optimism. And I can tell you that after 5 months in the Knesset, I'm filled with even more optimism and even more hope than I was when we entered. I want to begin with a story that happened as my wife and I brought our children and moved our family to Israel 9 years ago, almost to the day, July 14th, 2004. And you have this, first of all, we flew on a nefesh b'nefesh flight, which every single person on this plane was making aliyah. And you have this teary goodbye at JFK where you literally feel like you're ripping the grandchildren away from their grandparents, and it's not easy to do at all. And we got onto the airplane, and we're getting our children settled. Our youngest at the time was 6 weeks old, and we're getting everybody settled on the plane. And the pilot went through the regular routine that pilots go through every time you fly. And he said, we'll be flying at 30,000 feet. The flight will take 9.5 hours. I presume he said, in an hour we'll have dinner, and then the movie, et cetera, et cetera. And then he says, sit back, relax, enjoy the flight. I'm here to take you home. And it was an amazing moment where somehow, in the entire process of making Aliyah, in just one short phrase, he captured everything. And my wife and I looked at each other. It was this moment of recognition of, wow, after 2,000 years, we are blessed to be the representatives of our family to come back home. And it colored everything about the experience, because instead of it being certainly a move up, and we were excited about it, and very idealistic and very Zionistic, and looking for a great future for our family and our children, it just changed my whole perspective on the experience. And I'm going to relate back to that in a few moments. We chose Beit Shemesh, ironically enough, or hysterically enough, because on my pilot trip, I was driving around Beit Shemesh, and I saw there were Charedim in Beit Shemesh, there were Chilonim, Sfaradim, Ashkenazim, Dati Leumi, English speakers, Ethiopians, Russians. I called my wife and I was all excited about it. I said, we have to move Beit Shemesh so we can show our children how all these different populations can live together and get along in perfect harmony with one another. And that was literally the reason why we chose Beit Shemesh. So I was naive, and very quickly we realized that this wasn't the case. And we moved to a country which at that point was 56 years old, and just remarkable when you think about what was accomplished in 56 years. I think about the blood, sweat, and tears that went into this miracle of a functioning country and a civilization, and everywhere you turn, just cities sprouting up, and high tech and industry, just remarkable. There's one aspect of all of this which we hadn't gotten right, and we still haven't gotten right, and that is, how do you take 2,000 years of different experiences, people who literally experienced different religious experiences, cultural experiences, languages, different races, and you take them all and put this in this little geographic area called the State of Israel and find a way for everybody to get along? That's the one part of this miracle of the ingathering of the exiles, which is certainly the most challenging part, and that's the part which we have not really gotten right. I thought to myself, well, I come from the yeshiva world. I studied in Israel, in Haredi institutions, and in America as well, and I understand where that world is coming from, but I also understand certainly the American model is very different in nature. I went to Haredi yeshiva in Baltimore, in Ner Yisrael, but also went for a few hours a day to university. And we saw how the model works, and we saw how not only is it not a contradiction, but it actually enhances one or the other. I said, I'll be a mediator. I'll be a mediator. And, I'll get. Can't we all just get along? That's the model. So I tried. I actually got to meetings with rabbis of the more extremist community, and failed miserably in my attempts to mediate. But I learned so much in the process about where certainly the more extremist community is coming from. I got a deeper understanding of the broader Haredi community, and while they're not essentially responsible in any way, they're not violent in nature, they're not, the average person on the street is not looking to force anyone religiously or like, but I got a sense of where the broader community is from, and in the process I got a better understanding of the secular community in Israel, and certainly I already understood everybody in between, and really became more of a community activist. Because I felt, and this is my message which I speak about wherever I go, I'm Orthodox, I believe in it 100% to a degree that you could say that anything is 100%. I've taught about it for decades, I've written books about it, but I don't have the right to force what I believe on anybody else. And I certainly don't have the right to use the vehicle of a government to force what I believe on somebody else. And in Beit Shemesh, we started to actually learn the power of what happens when we break down barriers and we actually start to work together. And there are a few incidents in particular that I'm thinking about where the odds were very much against us in terms of succeeding in various, I'll use the term battles for lack of a better term, over various issues. But the moment there was a coalition from moderate Haredi through Chiloni, and we worked together, that's when we were able to see success. And along the way, though, I started learning some other lessons. For example, I really learned about the improper mix of religion and politics. Obviously, Israel is very complicated. You can't separate church and state the way we do in the States, for sure, where we can just say there's a complete separation. We want to identify ourselves as a Jewish state, so therefore you don't want to divorce the Judaism completely from the state. But the mix of religion and politics, and I can absolutely see a distinction between the two, that's where I started seeing problems. Just two short anecdotes which really crystallized this for me were in the last municipal elections in Beit Shemesh. It was 2008. We have very big elections coming up in October, where very much the future of the city, from my perspective, is very much at stake. And by the way, it's not an issue of a Haredi mayor or not Haredi mayor. You can have a Haredi mayor who's a fantastic mayor, who runs the city well and gives every population in the city everything which is magia to them, what everybody deserves. And that's not an issue of Haredi or not. But here, we had a specific election, and there was a candidate for the Shas party who we knew going into it had connections to the more extremist element in the Haredi community, and there was a real battle. I was working on behalf of, voluntarily, on behalf of a religious Zionist candidate named Shalom Lerner, and there were two rallies that took place 2 weeks before the election, and I went to both because you always want to see what your opposition is saying. So I went to one in Ramat Beit Shemesh, and a very, very big Rav in the Haredi community came from Bnei Brak, and he said something which was just false. And I don't blame him for it. I assume the information he got, but he said something false. He said, vote for Moshe Abutbol, who is the Shas candidate, because he's the only person in the race who has fear of heaven. I think to myself, how can he say that? Right? The other candidate, Shalom Lerner, he prays 3 times a day. He learns every day. How can you say it? How can you make that statement? And again, I felt that there was an improper mix of religion and religious leadership getting involved in politics. The even clearer situation was the Shas rally. I'm in this gymnasium in Old Beit Shemesh. There's a few thousand people who don't categorize themselves as religious, even though they don't realize that they are religious on a very strong level, in my opinion, but they don't call themselves religious. And they're in this gymnasium, and Rav Yosef came, and it was a fascinating experience in general to see how it works. But at the end of the rally, I'm sitting up in the rafters in this row high up in the gymnasium. At the end of the rally, Rav Yosef says, next week is elections, and he said, if you vote for Moshe Abutbol, who is the Shas candidate, he said, I promise you the world to come. And I said to myself 2 things. First of all, okay, we lost because I can't promise that to anybody. That's first of all. But second of all, I saw how improperly you have this mix of religion and politics. It's a political issue, and that's promising of the world to come. And I realized how corrupt we can become when we start, and even deeper than that, how corrupted Judaism becomes when it starts becoming part of the political process. So these all sort of directed me, even though I'm an educator, I love teaching. I miss teaching a tremendous amount, I really do. And that's all I really wanted to do. It started leading me towards a realization that maybe there needs to be other voices in politics, and specifically other religious voices in politics. And I started exploring the idea of getting involved in politics. There's no doubt that the climax for Beit Shemesh happened at the beginning of last school year, 2 years ago, where on a daily basis for the course of months, there were extremists who were coming and verbally assaulting young girls. I saw things that I never would have imagined I'd see with my own eyes. And I went to rabbis, and I went to the police, and I went to the government, and no one was really willing to help. Everybody had their own reasons why not. And all I said to myself was, this is just wrong, and somebody has to grab onto the reins and solve this, and nobody did. And that's when my wife and I really talked to each other and said, okay, now we're getting involved in politics. I'll be honest with you, I never imagined that I'd be a member of Knesset. I figured, first of all, my Hebrew is definitely not good enough to serve in the Knesset, and also just the whole political culture of interrupting other people while they're speaking, and things which at Chata'ai Ani Maskir Hayom I've gotten pretty decent at in 5 months. But I couldn't imagine that I could be part of that culture, but I certainly wanted to be someone who was involved behind the scenes. And I really felt that a major part of the problem that we have in this country is the Haredi community's isolationist approach. Because the more you're isolated from the outside world, the more you think that somebody else is, and these are terminologies that they use, so I apologize for them, but you think that somebody else is the devil or is Satan. That's the way it's viewed. The more you're isolated, the more you don't understand. In fact, to the point that in conversations that I've had with Haredim in Beit Shemesh, in Ramat Beit Shemesh, some of them expressed to me that even within families, right now you have a culture where very often the wives go out to work and the husbands are in kollel, and there's actually sometimes tensions in marriages over this issue because the wife goes out to work, she comes across people who aren't Haredi, and she sees that they're value-centered people and good, decent, upstanding people who have the same struggles and they're trying to find their way in life just like everybody else. And the husbands are still in a mode of, no, everything outside is pasul, everything else is impure, and there's actually tensions in terms of the education of the children. So it's clear to me that when we talk about trying to achieve unity, if the goal is to receive ultimate unity and to achieve a point where all of us in Israel are united in purpose, that it very much relates to the ultra-Orthodox community becoming a part of Israeli society. And I'll go 2 steps further. Obviously, there are economic issues, which a lot of people will focus on, that economically the system can't work the way it works right now, where an entire population as an ideology is against general studies and as ideology against joining the workforce, even though individuals do. So there's the economic argument, but I'm coming from 2 other perspectives. One is the unity element, and the other one is I do believe that it's wrong from a spiritual perspective, and I do believe that God wants us to be involved in the world, and I'll go one step further, and that is instead of standing at the Knesset podium and saying everything out there is so rotten, look at all the crime and everything else in the secular community, fix that and then worry about us in the Haredi community, I say just the opposite. We should be out there trying to help fix it. I mean, it's true that in the Haredi community there is a lot of chesed and there is very little crime compared to the... So let's take those values, let's be part of broader society, not force people to be religious, but let them see the beauty that exists within that world and within a world of Torah in general. Let's be part of the broader society. So the decision was made, let's get involved in politics. The last name on my radar screen when I thought about getting involved in politics was Yair Lapid. All I had heard, and I emphasize that word heard, that's an important lesson in all of this as well. All I had heard about Yair was negative. Yair is anti-Haredi. Yair is anti-Torah. Yair is anti-religion. Okay, Yair is an anti-Semite. These are the things that you hear just through the rumor mill. I didn't know him at all at any level. And then a very good friend sent an email with a link to a speech which all of you, if you want to understand a little bit about Yair, I definitely recommend that you watch. It's Yair Lapid at Kiryat Ono. This is before Yair went into politics, actually. He gave a speech to Haredim who were in a college program at Kiryat Ono. And he said 2 words which were very powerful, and they ring in my ears every single day, especially when I'm in the Knesset. And Yair looked at this group of Haredim, and he said, Atem nitzachtem. He said, you won. And then he explained. And he said that when the State of Israel was founded, there was an absolute battle over what kind of country we were going to have. The secular founders of Israel, and I want to emphasize, people who I revere for their initiative, their courage, and their vision, there's no doubt that an overwhelming majority of them wanted to have a very secular Israel, sort of a new Judaism devoid of Torah and mitzvot, which possibly we needed in the exile, but we don't need in our new existence in Israel. Whereas the religious community fought against that and said, no, our reason to be here is based on God and based on Torah and mitzvot, and there was a battle. And Yair said, Atem nitzachtem, you've won. You have shown us that there's no basis to be here and for our right to be in this land without God, without Tanakh, without our rich history. And he said, now take responsibility, you've won that battle, and now be a part of the leadership of this country, and let's work together. And I saw this speech, and I had this image in my head of this hand coming out from the secular side, a secular icon in Israel, is saying, let's come out and work together. And I felt that I wanted to have the zchut, the merit, to be one of the people who sort of grabbed the other side of that hand. And without getting into the details of how, I got to a point where I was able to sit together with Yair and really have a one-on-one meeting and get to know each other. The first 5 minutes of the meeting, I realized that everything I had heard about him was certainly false. There's no place of hatred whatsoever, and it really comes from a sincere desire to work together and make things better in Israel. That was the first thing which was clear. Somewhere around 15 minutes into the conversation, I had a very sad thought. I said to myself, how can it be that I've been living in Israel for 8.5 years, and I'm a friendly guy, I say good morning and Shabbat Shalom to anybody who passes me, regardless of the strange looks that I get when I do so, but I do say hello, how are you to everyone. But this was the first time that I was sitting with someone who identifies himself as secular and was having a real conversation of substance, of understanding who he is, where he's coming from, giving him a chance to understand where I'm coming from. And that's a tragedy. That's a tragedy that we build these walls between each other, and there's no place of interface whatsoever. And as a result, you have polarization, and you have tensions, and you even have hatred. But I really believe that it comes from a complete lack of understanding of each other and a lack of ever having a place where we somehow meet and come together. So I accepted upon myself to open a branch of Yesh Atid in Beit Shemesh. Not an easy task at all. But I accepted the challenge because I really believe that the same message that Yair was talking about was something which was important for people in Beit Shemesh to hear as well. Over time, the relationship deepened and developed to the point that he offered for me to run for Knesset. It was actually a fantastic meeting where Yair actually asked to speak in English, which was very much to my advantage. And we talked about very real issues because before I signed on to be part of the Yesh Atid list, I wanted to know that I was comfortable with everything that Yesh Atid was going to move forward with, and yet Yair certainly wanted to know that he was comfortable that I was going to be a partner every step of the way. So we talked about very real issues. We talked about religion and state issues that no one has been addressing in this country. We talked about the draft issue, which was approved today by the government. We talked about general studies. We talked about a lot of very important issues. And we looked at each other in the eye, and he kept to his word, I kept to my word. He told me I'd be number 17 on the list. I did not think in any way that was realistic, and I was fine with that. I figured after the elections we'd get our 10 seats or so, and I would have a role to play in terms of representing the moderate ultra-Orthodox community in the Knesset. That's really what I felt was going to happen. Within the party, I'd help develop some of the programs. During the campaign, remarkable things started happening. The first step was Yair reaching out and naming Rabbi Shai Peron as number 2 on his list, something which Yair took tremendous flack for from the secular community, reaching out a religious rabbi as the number 2 in your party. What are you doing? And Yair said, no, that's exactly what I want to be doing, because going out of my comfort zone is exactly what we have to do. We can keep fighting together for the next 500 years, or we can say we agree about 80% of the issues, let's move forward on those, and on 20% we disagree, we have to sit around a table and we have to talk them through, and all sides have to make compromises, and it's not going to be 100% for anyone, but we'll find a way to work together. Rabbi Shai Peron received tremendous flack in the religious community, joining with Yair Lapid. How can you do that? And he said, that's exactly what I want to be doing. That's exactly the message, and that's the way it went on throughout the list. I was so proud personally to be on a list where 8 out of the top 16 were female, and we're so proud that all of them are in the Knesset. It's the first time in Israeli history. First time in history there's been representation like that, and one representative in particular, Aliza Lavi, she's the head of the Women's Committee, Advancing Women, and she's a bulldozer. Every single week there's another meeting about another major issue where she is pushing and pushing to make sure that women have an equal role in the state of Israel. And so it's remarkable to see these kinds of things being accomplished. During the course of the campaign, something which a lot of people don't know, we as a party had events. Just the 20 of us, actually it was. It's amazing that we ended up with 19. 20 of us got together, no press, no politics, just to get to know each other. Remarkable, remarkable events. One in particular, which I'll never forget, it was the first one that we had. It was at Yair's house. And I'll be honest with you, at that point, I still wasn't 100% comfortable. I was still nervous, right? When is something going to happen where I just feel, okay, I should not be in this situation? And I was nervous about it. I was trying to be courageous, but at the same time, you're always nervous. And I thought that moment was happening at the very end of this event at Yair's house. It was a great event. We played all kinds of get-to-know-each-other games and things like that. It was just great because it is important to be a family. It is important to have unity together in a party because otherwise, things start falling apart. Everything which everyone assumes is going to happen about Yesh Atid, right? A new party, new centrist party, it'll last one time and go away. So we're working against that by being together as a family. At the very end, Yair says, everyone gather around in a circle. I said, uh-oh, here we go. I don't know what's going to happen right now. And a very prominent Israeli singer gets into the middle with a guitar. And all of us sing together to end the night, Yesh Atid, the anti-religious and anti-Torah party as it's portrayed out there. We stood in a circle and we sang Adon Olam together. And that's how the night ended. And that was one of those moments where I said to myself, this is amazing. It's amazing to be part of this. We're all coming from different backgrounds, different levels of religiosity, different understandings of exactly what Judaism means to everyone. And yet, here we are together with one thing which does unify us together, and that is Adon Olam. And that shows how we can work together. And there are unifying factors, and that was certainly one of them. We decided during the campaign to talk about religious issues. I, in particular, bonded on a very close level with Yael German, who's now the health minister. She actually initiated it. She wanted to understand. She comes from a very secular background. She was part of the Meretz Party originally. And she wanted to understand, what is the yeshiva world all about? Why is Torah learning such an important value? To understand more. And that's part of getting along, is also understanding each other. And I took advantage of the opportunity to understand, what is it like to grow up in Israel and what's your vision for Israel as a secular Jew in Israel? What does a Jewish state mean to you? And we talked about these issues. Rabbi Shai Perron and I decided to have a conversation with the females in Yesh Atid. I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland. My father, of blessed memory, was a judge in the federal government. And a large part of our family are conservative, reform, unaffiliated. I'm very comfortable in settings that are non-Jewish and non-Orthodox. And certainly, even though within the Orthodox community there are guidelines and halacha in terms of physical contact between the genders, certainly if a woman sticks out her hand to shake my hand, I will shake her hand, and I have my long list of great aunts who give me a big bear hug whenever they see me, and it's totally fine. But we decided that if we're going to be leading or representing the religious community in politics in Israel, we should have the conversation with the women in Yesh Atid so they can understand, to be sensitive to these issues. So we had the conversation. It was a remarkable conversation. Some of the women saying, wow, that makes complete sense. The world would be such a better place if everyone kept to this. And some women saying, you guys are completely crazy, but we'll respect where you're coming from. But an open conversation where people are talking about different backgrounds and different understandings. The night before the elections, I received a phone call from a newspaper, and they told me that the next morning they're reporting my spot as being realistic. In 1 second, everything changed, and my head was certainly spinning, because I really was not imagining myself as a member of the Knesset. And I did what a good Jewish boy does. I dropped everything, and I ran to the kotel to just pour my heart out. And I really did. I could tell you, the opportunity to be right in front of my eyes, to have this platform. And I actually sent an SMS to Yair from the Kotel. I've talked very openly with Yair about theology and God and prayer and all these topics. I sent him an SMS. I said, Yair, I'm at the Kotel. I'm praying for you. I'm praying for the party. I'm praying for myself. I was number 17 on the list. Boaz Toporowski was number 18 on the list. And Yair is always responsive. Here he sent back a very quick response. And he said, Dov Hayakar. I'll say it in Hebrew first and translate. He said, Itcha kfar sagarti, achshav ani oved al Toporowski. He's like, you're a done deal. You're in. Now we're working on number 18. And the next day, you really felt that in the air as we traveled around to the polling places. You actually saw it in two parties. The Labor and Likud were very, very quiet. And in Yesh Atid and Bayit Yehudi, you really saw a lot of excitement. Now, there's no doubt that on a base level, you have two new ideological leaders, young leaders. That's part of it. But if you think about it for a moment, Yesh Atid is essentially a secular party, which said we're bringing in people who are religious. And Bayit Yehudi is essentially a religious party, which opened the doors to people who call themselves secular or not religious Zionists. And that is certainly a part of the message, which was definitely catching on. Election night, and this is a story which, for me, captures it all. There's a lot of excitement. We're in party headquarters. Everyone is excited. We know we're going to do better than most people thought. And I always say that now I entered into the Knesset, I have a brand new appreciation for the wisdom of the founding fathers of the United States and the system of government which they created, separation of powers, checks and balances. The one thing which Israel has right is that on election day there are no exit polls released until everyone has finished voting, something which doesn't really make a lot of sense. That happens in the States. So at 10 o'clock at night, we're going to see the results. And there are 3 screens in the front of the room, Channel 1, Channel 2, and Channel 10. And we as candidates are standing in the front row, and we're going to see the results. And at 9:58, I turn to my right, and who's standing there? Yael German is standing to my right. And I said to myself, in 2 minutes, we're going to see great news on these screens. And Yael, meaning absolutely no malice whatsoever, just on instinct, Yael is going to give me a massive hug. That's going to happen. I said, okay, usually that's, but I said, but next to all 3 of these screens were TV cameras and newspaper cameras from every major news outlet. And tomorrow morning, all across Israel, the Haredi in Yesh Atid, who's preaching that we can be part of Israeli society without sacrificing anything religiously, there I am in this big hug with Yael German, and that's it, the game is over. But I said to myself, I respect Yael too much to say anything about this. It's not fair at 9:58 on election night to bring this up. I put myself in this position. It is what it is. It is what it is. So 10 o'clock on the 3 screens, we see 19, 19, 19, way beyond what we had expected. We're the 2nd largest party in the country. There's absolute pandemonium in the room and celebration. Yael turns to me exactly as I knew she was going to do. She turns to me and she goes like this. Just like that. And then she gave herself a hug. She went like this. And it was an amazing moment for me because I realized Yael knows that I respect her 100% for who she is religiously. I respect her 100%. And I have absolutely zero agenda to coerce her in any way. And as a result, on instinct, this wasn't thought out, on instinct, she was able to completely respect me, where I'm coming from. And that is very much the message. And that was a moment where I realized that this is possible. We just have to be willing to sit around the table together and work together. And even though it could be uncomfortable at times, and even though it does mean compromising, even though it does mean it's not going to be 100% the way I would want it to be, but at least we can work together and make progress. Yair wanted us to tackle the issues of religion and state. When that pilot said, I'm here to take you home, he didn't look around the plane first and see, let me see, are there Haredim here? Are there Orthodox here? Are there conservative here? Are there Reform here? Are there sect? He didn't do that. He had a plane full of Jews who were flying to Israel, and he said, I'm here to take you home. And it has to be a home where everybody feels that it's their home and where nobody is forcing their way on somebody else. And that's very much what we're trying to accomplish in Yesh Atid. As a Knesset member, you have to divide your time amongst many things. A major part of what I'm working on does relate to the Haredi community, and most of it is done below the radar screen. Because if you look for headlines, unfortunately, the way the community works, a lot of those initiatives will be torpedoed. And therefore, it's not something which we're going to the press with every time we have success, but it's a large part of what I do. And people would be shocked to know how many Haredim meet with me. Some of them look both ways before they go into my office to make sure no one captured them. One even asked me, are there security cameras in here that people could be looking? That's the fear, just to understand where the community is coming from. But there are many people who do want to make progress, and it is very much a bottom-up type of initiative which we're working on. And I'm very happy to report that after 5 months of working on this, God willing, on Rosh Chodesh Elul, in about a month from now, a month from tomorrow, there are going to be 7 Haredi yeshiva high schools who are signing up to be part of a public school system. We have Mamlachti Chiloni, Mamlachti Dati. There's going to be Mamlachti Haredi. And they're going to be yeshiva high schools. They're going to be fully funded. And again, very quietly, very much under the radar screen. But once those succeed, And once the Haredi community sees that you can be Haredi, you can be fervently Orthodox and still have general studies, and it actually gives you the tools to be able to go out and earn a living, they will no doubt start taking off. And little by little, this is something which is a long-term project, not short-term, but it's already starting. Last Wednesday, I approached the Minister of Defense in the plenum and I said, I need your signature right now on this so they can start registering students. And he signed on the first Haredi Hesder yeshiva, where it's Haredi boys, Haredi Rosh Yeshiva, and they're going to be in yeshiva and serving in the military. And they'll be serving in the military they'll be trained in technology, and then they'll serve in the military and technology fields. The Army told us they're lacking 3,000 soldiers in technology units, and then they'll have a trade afterwards, which they can then go to work. And so on and so forth. Numerous projects, and I could go on in terms of the list, but to give you a sense of, we're working very hard to slowly bring the Haredi community and reach those voices who want to help and become a part of Israeli society. I personally am working on laws where I'm trying to break down barriers. So we sat down as a staff, and I figured what laws can unify everyone together. And when I say everyone, I mean Haredi and Chiloni and everyone in between, and Jew and Arab. So we're working on laws that relate to Tsar Balei Chayim, the mistreatment of animals, where everyone can say, you know what, we agree about this. We're using laws about the environment, where everyone can say, we agree about this. Because when I ask myself, how are you defining ourselves as a Jewish state? What does that mean, a Jewish state? Right? Does it mean the level of Shmirat Shabbat? But everybody does that differently. Is the level of Kashrut? But everyone does that differently. And also, how are we a light unto the nations when it comes to our level of Shabbat observance? Or that's not a light. The light unto the nations comes from what kind of people we are, right? That we should be the example in the world of a people who preach to the world and show the world through our example about equality and about no racism and about no discrimination, about treating animals properly and the environment, all these things where we can agree and unify together core, I'd say, Jewish values, Judeo-Christian values, core human values. That's where we have to be a light to the nation. We've very much lost our way on that front. We're not defining ourselves that way. So those are the kind of laws that certainly trying to work on. And finally, there's no doubt that I have the hat of the American, former American. I had to actually renounce my American citizenship before becoming a member of Knesset. Not an easy thing to do at all. But certainly have those values, and also helping English speakers in Israel and also diaspora communities. All of you are going out and you're going to be part of the big world out there. And I believe a major role in what you do in your communities should relate to the State of Israel. Because when we talk about things that can unify all of us, even though the State of Israel has done a poor job as of late in terms of being a unifier, we know that, especially on these areas of religion and state. The good news is that we're tackling that, and we're working on it. And there's actually a government which views that as part of its flags to try to tackle these issues. And I hope that message can get out there, and I hope that the State of Israel can become a unifier. I think back as a child growing up in Silver Spring, I went to the Hebrew Academy of Greater Washington in grade school. The one day of the year that I did not like the most was Yom HaAtzmaut, because I had to get dressed up in a white shirt and blue pants, and you go to the gymnasium, and every year they which excited us about Israel, and we saw no purpose in terms of what does that mean to me? People planting orchards in Israel. Thank you so much. What does that mean to have people planting an orchard in Israel? Why is that relevant to myself? And one year, actually, we went into the gymnasium expecting to see the same old orange, and all of a sudden the screen said, the Washington Bullets go to Israel. And our NBA champion, Washington Bullets, came to Israel. They showed us highlights of the game against Maccabi Tel Aviv. And we saw Elvin Hayes at the Kotel, and Mitch Kupchak at Masada, and Bobby Dandridge on a camel. We were like, we love Israel. And the next year, we were all excited for Yom HaAtzmaut, and there was the orange again. But the message, when I look back to that as an educator, right? We have to find a way to make Israel relevant to our communities and to our children, and to talk about the magnitude the absolute magnitude, historically, of this development, and to really put into a context, the high school students absolutely can get it if we talk to them about that way. Or talk about the sources. Fine, you can show me the orange orchard, but talk about the sources which say that the reflourishing of the state of Israel. Why is planting trees in Israel so important? It's because all the sources say that's the sign of redemption. However we understand exactly what redemption means, but something major is happening where you had a wasteland 100 years ago, and now we've returned as a group of refugees running away from all kinds of persecution, and we've rebuilt this land, and we have our own homeland, and you can serve in a Jewish army and an Israeli army and get kids excited about it. And how about teaching kids Hebrew? I was in day school for 12 years. 12 years they had me in the building, and yet I walked away not being fluent in Hebrew. And I'm not even talking about to make aliyah. Even just to open up the world of learning. Look at this Beit Midrash full of sources. Give all of our children the world of Torah learning. Make it available to them. And this is what I believe many of us have to do. And as a member of Diaspora Affairs Committee, it's certainly a large part of what I'm trying to do. When I think about what we're accomplishing in the Knesset, and I'm over time, so I want to wrap this up, a lot of it relates to one event that we have every single week. And this very much relates to the Institute where we are right now. Yesh Atid started the first in the history of the Knesset, a Beit Midrash for members of Knesset. And every single Tuesday at 3 o'clock, with zero press, it's deliberately that way, zero press, Tuesday at 3 o'clock, we sit together, religious, not religious, whoever is invited to come, and we sit and we learn Torah together. And it's really a remarkable 45 minutes, because what happens, first of all, certainly the initiative is not my idea. It was the idea of Rabbi Shai Perron, who's now the Minister of Education, and Ruth Calderon together. And you have religious, not religious men, women, sitting and studying Torah together. And the leaders of the group each time are different, men, women. It's remarkable to have different parties. And it's such a unifying experience because we learn from 3 to 3:45. At 4 o'clock, we go into the plenum. And in the plenum, in the Knesset, okay, you'll see people screaming at each other, and that's what makes the headlines. That's what people do for Knesset TV. And what you don't see is that behind the scenes, behind the Knesset room that we sit in, there's an area with couches, and they serve us coffee and cake, and literally sometimes 5 minutes after two people are going at it in the plenum, you'll see them sitting together over coffee and cake behind the scenes. And it drives me crazy because I know that people see them on the political level fighting, and they don't realize that there's a human side where we do respect one another and we do get along, but in the streets, people assume probably that the human side we're all supposed to be fighting, and that's a shame. But in that room, I really see, the same way I mentioned before that Adon Olam was a unifying factor for our party, I really see how even in the Knesset, people who I disagree with about so many things ideologically, I do, on various issues, but we could sit together and we could study a piece from the Talmud or a chapter of Tanakh and talk about it and hear different people's insights, and it really is a unifying factor. Ruth Calderon and I decided to start a Knesset task force to sort of bring that message out to broader Israel and to bring together people from various backgrounds and study together. Nothing political, no one's forcing anything religiously. We'll come with sources, they'll study together, and then afterwards the two of us will lead a Torah study session. We hope to start that, God willing, in the fall. But that's what this is all about. It's about talking to each other, finding those unifying factors, focusing on what unifies us instead of focusing on what pushes us away from each other. Having a rabbinate which views its role as solving problems or finding solutions instead of creating problems. That's the notion of what we're working on right now. And I certainly hope that that dialogue can continue even between us. One of my assistants is over there, Adam Bellos. Adam can raise his hand. A young man who said that he wants to get involved and help out. Adam has business cards on him. I ask all of you, anyone who's interested after we're done here, certainly, let's keep the conversation going. It could be that wherever you're going, you hear things which you could be critical of what we're doing, and I welcome the criticism. I'm used to the criticism. And whether it's via email or Facebook, certainly to be in touch. But if you have ideas, I certainly welcome those ideas as well. A lot of people tell me, Dov, you're dreaming. You're dreaming. You're the naive American, you're fresh off the boat. In Israel, this is the Middle East, we're hardened by our ways. You're not going to be able to change this. So first of all, we already see the changes happening. That's first of all, that's the good news. But second of all, as far as I understand it, we have to try, because the moment we say we're not going to try, the one thing we know for sure is we won't succeed. But I'm going to go one step further. And I end with this short story, and I hope you hold on to this story wherever you're going in your next step in life. When I was a young kid growing up in Silver Spring, a few times a year, we would go to the Soviet embassy in Washington to demonstrate on behalf of our brothers and sisters behind the Iron Curtain. Certainly a remarkable period of time for world Jewry, and especially North American Jewry, rallying on behalf of fellow Jews who were either languishing in Siberia or just refused next, they're not able to make Aliyah. One of those times, I remember it vividly like yesterday, they gave us signs. Usually we sang Am Yisrael Chai and had all these chants that we would say. We had a silent vigil. We just stood there in front of the embassy. And I was given a sign, this 13-year-old kid from Silver Spring, who the truth is at that time, the only thing that really mattered in life were my Redskins and my Orioles and the like. And I wasn't thinking about world Jewry, but I was a good kid. I went to the demonstration, and I'm standing there with a sign. And my sign said, "Free Yuli Edelstein." That was my sign. Tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock, I'm going to go into the Knesset chamber, decades later, as a member of the Israeli Knesset, and sitting in the front of the room, in the big chair, is the speaker of the Knesset, Yuli Edelstein. So no one's going to tell me not to dream. David HaMelech said, Shir HaMa'alot B'shuv Adonai Shivat Zion Hayinu Kicholmim. We're like dreamers. This whole thing is a dream. 70 years ago, my grandmother, may she continue to live and be well, 70 years ago, my grandmother was languishing in Auschwitz. And 2 months ago, she came to Yerushalayim and visited me in the Knesset and was sitting in my Knesset office. And she sat there and she said, "This can't be. It can't be. This is a dream. This is a Jewish state, a Jewish parliament, my grandson, a member of that parliament. This is a dream." So, yes, I'm dreaming, but we have to dream. The people who started this state were dreamers, and they saw it through, and it has its positives and its negatives and its moments of challenges, and that's the way any revolution happens, any change. But we, in order to succeed as a people in this country, we have to find a way to make it a place where you're going back home, where it's the home for every single Jew around the world, and I'll add, where we can also get along with any non-Jew who wants to live here as well. This is something which is our mission. So I encourage all of you to be dreamers, to believe that you can stand up and make a difference in all the communities that you're going to please share this message that we're trying to make progress in Israel in terms of unity and in terms of all Jews feeling comfortable here. Let's dream together. Mazal Tov again. We're so proud of you and your accomplishments, and let's get together at happy occasions. Thank you so much. Thank you.